From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Welcome to the African and Middle East Reading Room. And I'm delighted to see you here for this very special program. Today we're hosting an award-winning poet from the only Spanish-speaking country in Africa, Mr. Donato Ndongo. This program is part of a series that we launched last October entitled Conversations with African Writers and Poets. We are three partners in this endeavor: the African section in this division, the Poetry and Literature Center here at the library, headed by Robert Casper, and the Africa Society of the National Summit on Africa, whose president and CEO is Bernadette Paulo. And in a moment, you will hear from all two of them. We also partner with others on special programs, like today. And today, we have partnered with the Hispanic division here at the library. Dr. Georgette Dorn, the chief of the division, of the Hispanic division, has graciously agreed to interpret for us the conversation that will take place because the poet will be speaking in Spanish. I also want to thank the Spanish Embassy, without whom this program would not have been possible. And thank you so much. We have here members of the embassy who are here. The African section in the African Middle East Division organizes numerous programs: book signings, briefings, symposia, lecture, music programs, films on and about Africa for the general public. We see our mandate as at the library, not only as acquiring and processing publications and other materials from the continent, but also giving people a better understanding of the life and culture of the more than 50 countries that constitute the region. Today, Laverne Page, who's the Africa area specialist in division responsible for Equatorial Guinea, okay, and who has traveled to the region, knows the region well, will be the interviewer who will carry on this conversation with Donato Ndongo. But before we start our program, I would like to call upon Robert Casper, the head of the Poetry and Literature Center, to make some remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Jane. And thanks to the African and Middle East Division at the Library of Congress. I also want to thank myself, Georgette Dorn, for her help in this event. In the past year, the Poetry and Literature Center has partnered with over a dozen different divisions at the Library of Congress. And I can tell you that no two chiefs are as committed to celebrating writers and as wonderful to work with as Mary Jane and Georgette are. Let me just say a few words about our series Conversations with African Poets and Writers. As Mary Jane said, we started last October and are very proud of the range of writers we have been able to feature from throughout the continent. Last night, for instance, we hosted South African poet Keora Petse Kotsi-Tsele, and on Tuesday, May 1st, we will return here in that Ahmed Reading Room for a noon reading featuring Nigerian author Helon Habila. To find out more about this reading or other literary readings at the Library of Congress, you can visit www.loc.gov/poetry. You can also find out more about the library's African and Middle East Division at www.loc.gov/rr/Ahmed/ or about the Hispanic Division at www.loc.gov/rr/Hispanic. Finally, if you want to see our previous events in this series via webcast, you can go to the library's homepage and click on webcasts. And now, let me introduce our other partner for Conversations with African Poets and Writers, Bernadette Paulo from the Africa Society of the National Summit on Africa.
Thank you, Rob. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hate having my back to you, but I want to thank you, Dr. Mary Jane Deeb and Dr. Robert Casper, Dr. Georgette Dorn, and Laverne Page, and everyone associated with the Library of Congress for this iteration of Conversation with African Writers and Poets. You know, I would especially like to thank Mary Jane Deeb, who I have known for over 20 years, since I was 12. She is now and has always been someone I admire for her intellect and commitment and appreciation of the importance and distinction of cultures all over the globe. And finally, I would like to thank the staff of the Africa Society, represented here by two beautiful women from the continent, Sarah Caruso and Tatenda Majene. The Africa Society of the National Summit on Africa is really pleased to partner with the Africa section of the African Middle Eastern Division and the Poetry and Literature Center of the Library of Congress and the Hispanic Division and the Embassy of Spain. You know, it's our view that this is a perfect marriage, for we both are committed to providing a platform for African literary figures that is accessible to people throughout the world who, but for this program, might not have the privilege to know them. And yesterday we talked, this is a perfect segue also from our program yesterday. Yesterday, you know, we talked about how difficult it is to get translation for African literary figures. In fact, South African poet Mr. Kosetsile said that, you know, very few houses, printing houses, translate these works these days, and yet Donato Ndongo has managed to have his work translated into English, Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese, while at the same time contributing significantly to the body of literature of Equatorial Guinea, and that's quite a challenge. The Africa Society educates Americans of all ages about the countries, cultures, peoples, and contributions of the continent of Africa. We do so through teaching students and having films in partnership with the Travel Channel, who reach millions of people, and having a lecture series. But this program, to me, is very distinct and quite important, because there's no better way to shore up people's knowledge about the continent than to showcase its prominent figures, particularly those people who are so knowledgeable and so well educated. And that's a side of Africa that isn't portrayed in the American media. So we're very proud to be here today. Mr. Ndongo, having you here today makes us cognizant of the myriad of languages spoken on the continent. You know, we say that Equatorial Guinea is the only place that Spanish is spoken in Africa, but in fact, Spanish is spoken in the Western Sahara as well on the continent of Africa. And so we have this opportunity today to once again recognize the prowess of African writers that is felt in countries around the world, including European countries. Thank you, Mr. Ndongo. Thank all of you in the audience. We're very pleased to have you in our midst.
Thank you, Bernadette, and thank you, Rob. And now, a few words about the man of the hour. Donato Ndongo Biogo was born in 1950 in Ellen Efak, Nifang district in the mainland of Equatorial Guinea. In 1965, he moved to Spain to continue his secondary education. In 1973, he obtained a journalist degree from the Official School of Journalism, and in 1974 received a degree in history, specializing in contemporary history, from the University of Barcelona. He was the editor of magazines Indice de Madrid and Diario 16 of Madrid. He has published numerous articles in Spanish, such as Historia in the Spanish media, such as Historia 16, Mundo Negro, La Aventura de la Historia, Consejeros, and newspapers El País, La Vanguardia, and ABC. He has also been a contributor to Radio Exterior of Spain and Cadena Cope. Among his many books, there is History and Tragedy in Equatorial Guinea, published in 1977, Spain in Guinea, in 1997, the Anthology of Guinean Literature, 1984, and novels, Shadows of Your Black Memory, several editions of which were published in different languages. There's also The Power of the Storm, The Metro, and some of his stories have appeared in American magazines, including the Iowa Review and Transitions. He was Associate Director of the University College of Our Lady of Africa in Madrid, Deputy Director of the Centro Cultural Hispano-Guinean in Malabo, Delegate of the Spanish News Agency, EFE, in Africa Central, and Director of the Center for African Studies at the University of Murcia. Between 2005 and 2008, he was a visiting professor at the University of Missouri, Columbia. He has given numerous lectures and participated in conferences organized by universities and other institutions in Spain and European countries. But at this point, I think you really want to hear from him and not from me. So I stop, and we'll start with readings from his work.
He's going to read in Spanish, and then I'll translate into English.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon.
Que coja el micrófono.
He wants to hold it. She has to hold the microphone. The whole thing. Todo,
Sí,
todo junto.
lo puedo coger así. Muy brevemente, solamente para agradecer a los organizadores de este acto por darme la posibilidad de estar aquí entre ustedes en este templo de la cultura. Para mí es una gran satisfacción y un gran honor encontrarme aquí entre ustedes y inmediatamente, sin más preámbulos, voy a leer algunos de mis poemas. Tengo que decir que algunas de las metáforas pueden confundir, porque cuando me refiero a ella, por ejemplo, no me refiero a una mujer. Me refiero fundamentalmente a mi país, del que llevo demasiado tiempo separado cuando realmente me hubiera gustado vivir en él.
He thanks the library for inviting him, and he's saying that when you hear his poems, when he refers to she, it is not a woman, but it is his country. Can you hear okay, everybody? Go, empieza a leer.
¿Quién pudiera olvidar el encanto de un trino dulce en la madrugada? ¿Quién pudiera olvidar el esplendor de la luna brillando en el cielo oscuro? ¿Quién pudiera olvidar?
Who could forget the sweet voice of the dawn? Who could forget the splendor of the moon shining on a dark sky? Who could forget?
Borracho de ternura, llamé a ti, amiga mía, cuando los llantos suspiran en mi recuerdo. Palabras en el tiempo.
Drunk with tenderness, I called you, my friend, when the cries and the sighs of my memories, words in the time.
¿Cuántos poemas han escrito al mar? ¿Cuántos al amor, a tus ojos, a tus labios, a ti? Yo no quiero escribir hoy sobre nada, solo acariciar tu recuerdo.
How many poems have been written in the sea? How many to love, to your eyes, to your lips, to you? I don't want to write about anything, only to love your memory. And now we're going to read a piece in English from his translated book called Shadows of Memory. I liked to be in my uncle's cabin. He shunned the dwellings that imitated the style of the whites. This house was some distance apart from the main village at the edge of the forest, because he didn't like the road and had opposed its construction. His little house was made of tree trunks. He had tied together the melongo fibers. It had a grass roof supported by bamboo rafters, and between them he had a spread adobe made from mud he himself had mixed by stamping on it with his own feet. There were 2 small rooms and a spacious one. Around it were 6 dwellings, forming a semicircle, with ducks and chickens in front. These were the 6 abodes of his 6 wives and their children. Some of the children were grown and married and lived in the village on the road. Others were my age. I really liked it when Father Ortiz came. He used to stay at our house, and we would go over to Tio Abeso's place. Father Ortiz was determined to convert Tio Abeso. It was his apostolic mission. He wanted to give him up 5 of his wives and marry his first by the church. She was the only one the priest considered legitimate. He called the other ones concubines. I was the translator as he spoke of the one true religion, the death and the resurrection of Christ, of the redemption of mankind, and my uncle looked at him with the disdainful expression he reserved for white people. He asked the priest if he had ever seen all he was describing, and the priest said no, that it was a tradition. So then Tio Abeso said that he could tell the priest about the traditions of his tribe, because all tribes have their own traditions. And the secret of living in peace was for all the tribes to practice their own traditions without interfering with the others or trying to influence the powers. All traditions have things that are true and things that are false, or at least exaggerated, and no single one could be considered the one true religion. My uncle would say this as he brushed away flies with a small broom. He had nerves of steel. The priest would become uncontrollably angry. How dare you compare the revealed truth with your fetishes and your idol worship? He would call my uncle a blasphemer and tell him he would go to hell. With infinite patience, Tio Abeso answered that at the moment they were not in the territory of the white man's tribe. If he hadn't gone to the other man's tribe, trying to convert everyone to his belief, and he told the priest that there was no reason for him to be angry, and he asked him whether he could give me any idea how to find a place where I will burn, and whether he has been there. The priest admitted that he had never seen hell, but the revealed doctrine, the dogma of the one true church, and all the biblical tradition testified to the existence of hell, the place reserved for the souls of dead sinners, and the worst sin of all was to deny the presence of the one God of the Trinity. Tio then asked if the dead of the white man's tribe ever came back to tell what they had seen beyond the great river. And the priest asked how could that be, and that my uncle was making fun of him, because he should know that in no part of the world do dead people come back to life. And my uncle answered, so how do you know what happens to man after he dies? And the priest's best answer was faith in God, in his revealed doctrine, in the church he founded by his only son. And Tio said that he too had faith in his tradition, much faith, and just as the priest would never agree to convert to his creed because he didn't understand anything about it. So it was useless to hope that my uncle would ever be baptized. And with his eyes lost in the dusk, he asked if it was possible to trust the honor of a man who emptied out his most intimate feelings for a bunch of unproved words, or for being able to eat the olive oil. The priest then, Sigo, do you want to go on? Okay. I think we want to listen to him too. And the white man's God had told his people to be fruitful and multiply, so that they would not disappear from the face of the earth, because he had made them in his own image. Father Ortiz nodded, seemingly satisfied, and Tio asked the priest if he could abide by God's mandate to be fruitful. The priest was exasperated and grew angry, and tried to explain how he was serving God by sacrificing and living a chaste life, by renouncing the flesh. How God loves the pure and not the licentious, those who spend all the time fornicating day and night just for fleshly pleasure. Tell me, would you be telling me all this if your mother and father were like you? I translated the question, and the priest was silent. His face was red with rage, and my uncle then said that he couldn't believe in him because he himself had heard the priest say that his God created the world and had given man superior intelligence so that he could use it. And the priest was the first one not to abide by the mandate given by his own God. Tell him I can't understand how God can tell everyone to multiply and then say he prefers the ones who don't. The ones who go through this life without showing a single seed? Or is it that we have a special magic that allows them to propagate without touching a woman? Then the priest began to talk very fast in a language that was not Spanish, looking dejected, monotonously repeating the single short word that couldn't be translated into Fang because I didn't know what he was saying either. And Tio Beso called his first wife Mama Andeme and told her to take the duck with the black and white feathers and give it to the priest as a sign of their hospitality. You are both our guest, our neighbor, he told me to translate. And although we don't agree on anything, I must give you this duck to show we are good neighbors. Neighbors must always understand each other and above and beyond their ideas, just as one of our proverbs say, hunger will pass, but its legend will stay. The gesture seemed to placate Father Ortiz, who accepted the duck, and he took out a case from the sack he was carrying and a pack of cigarettes of strong tobacco, which my uncle had started to chew, and later had some of it ground up so he could sniff it. I'll baptize you one of these days, my stubborn old friend, and I translate this for my uncle, because I'm here to convert all of you to the one true faith. And my uncle said that he already had a name, that the one his father had given him by birth, and no god of any other tribe could be defended by the fact that his name was his name, and reminded the priest of his very own words that all men are children of God. But to be a child of God, one had first to be baptized to enter his sacred temple. And my uncle replied that birth comes before the name, and that you can't give a man a new name when he has it for such a long time. I have 28 children, tell him, and don't love one more than the other. And each one has a name and his own temperament. Why does this God have to punish me for calling myself my people? Go ahead and tell him. I'll stop here so you can read his poems. Ask the questions.
I was just going to say that you might,
I can read it.
oh, okay. I was just going to say something else. You're reading the English text of one of Mr. Ndongo's. You're reading the English text of one of Mr. Ndongo's books. We do have copies for sale here, and so afterwards you might want to stop and get a copy and find out what happens next. Okay. And so now we can start with questions. Okay. It's a pleasure to have Mr. Ndongo here. We rarely have people visiting us from certain parts of Africa, and so it seems that since he is here, let's take advantage of his presence and find out more about him and find out more about his country, Equatorial Guinea. We do have a few slides here. We can't show them all, but one shows you where the country of Equatorial Guinea is placed in Central Africa. And so for those of you who would like to know more, this is the beginning. This shows you exactly where it is. We have questions prepared for Mr. Ndongo so that we can get a better idea of him, of his writings. And I'm going to read the question in English, and Dr. Dorn will then translate, and then Mr. Ndongo will reply. These are general questions. There are about 8 of them, so the questions won't be overly involved, but they will give a flavor, I think, that all of us will appreciate. So to start, I'm interested in him. I'm interested in when you began writing, and I'd like to know why you turned to novels, mainly novels, as a medium of expression.
¿Cuándo empezó a escribir y por qué decidió escribir novelas?
Empecé a escribir novelas en 1980. Esta novela, cuyo fragmento se acaba de leer, Las tinieblas de tu memoria negra, La escribí en el verano de 1980, después de regresar de un viaje a Guinea Ecuatorial tras el derrocamiento del primer presidente de mi país, Francisco Macías, que era un terrible dictador. Vi el país destrozado. Yo no podía comprender cómo se había llegado a tal grado de degradación y por eso me puse a interiorizar para intentar hacerme comprender a mí mismo y a la sociedad y a todo el mundo por qué habíamos llegado a esta situación.
I wrote this book that you just heard an expert read from in 1980 after I had gone back to my country when the dictator was finally overthrown, and I wrote it to honor my country, Equatorial Guinea. Of course, then I had to be exiled again because the situation didn't get any better. So I went to Spain originally to study, came back in 1980, and then had to go back to Spain.
Mr. Ndongo, you have not only written novels, but have also been a journalist for the best part of your life. How has journalism impacted upon your work as a novelist and vice versa?
Además de escribir poemas y novelas, usted también ha sido periodista. ¿Cómo afectó el periodismo su trabajo en general?
Ahora se me conoce más como novelista, pero siempre he sido periodista. Pero me di cuenta de que el periodismo es un género importantísimo, puesto que permite comunicar, pero es efímero. Es decir, lo que hoy hemos sabido por un medio de información, posiblemente mañana lo olvidemos. Y ese papel en el que el periodista se ha esforzado en poner la información, luego sirve para envolver bocadillos. De manera que el periodismo es un género que no es suficiente para comunicar. También he escrito libros de historia y la historia solamente es para los entendidos, para los especialistas en historia. Por eso la literatura, la novela, es el género para mí más completo, puesto que permite esa comunicación y permite que el lector conserve la historia no solamente en su mente, sino también en su biblioteca y pueda consultarla en cualquier momento.
The novel is his best medium because it's the one where he can communicate more fully. Journalism reaches a lot of people, and it is a good medium, but he feels that novels are the best of all. And he also has written history, but histories are really more for people very specialized. But in fact, all three mediums are very important to reach different audiences.
I'm wondering if you could speak for a few minutes about exile and immigration. You left Equatorial Guinea and returned in 1979, and then left again in 1992. So how did the experience affect your writing of fiction?
How did exile? You left Equatorial Guinea in 1979 and again in 1992. ¿Cómo afectó el exilio a su modo de escribir? Perdón. ¿Cómo afectó el exilio a su modo de escribir?
No, eso ya me ha ocurrido en más de una ocasión y es normal. Más de la mitad de mi vida he vivido en el exilio y sigo viviendo en el exilio. Y por consiguiente, no sé cuándo va a terminar ese exilio. De manera que yo me lo he planteado como una forma de vida. Es decir, yo no soy de los exiliados que están pensando continuamente en que mañana regresaré, pasa el tiempo y no hacen absolutamente nada importante con su vida. Yo me he planteado el exilio simplemente como mi forma de vida y por consiguiente, mientras esté exiliado, voy a tratar de dar todo lo que pueda para que se logre la reconstrucción moral y cultural de mi país. De manera que la contribución que estoy tratando de hacer a mi país es precisamente esta, hacer sólida una base cultural y al mismo tiempo hacer que se conozca en el resto del mundo. Evidentemente, mi país no genera noticias agradables y desgraciadamente esas son las noticias que tenemos que dar, pero esa es la realidad que vivimos y la gente tiene derecho a saber por qué estoy en el exilio y no viviendo en mi país.
Exile has profoundly affected me as I spent a good deal of my life in exile. But unlike other exiles, I'm not allowing exile to limit me to think about my country and when I'm going to go back. Instead, I made a life, and my life is the one of an exile. And I spend my time writing novels and visiting newspapers to make my country better known and to fight for my country outside of the country. So in other words, it is a very interesting life, the life of an exile.
Although you have been in exile, you still are interested in the literature of your countrymen. You are still interested and involved, I would think, in the literature of Equatorial Guinea. And I'm wondering if you could describe the literary scene today in Equatorial Guinea. What are the big themes that are being discussed in literature and in poetry?
Aunque vivió tanto tiempo en el exilio, ¿podría decirnos algo de lo que es la literatura, el ambiente literario de la Guinea Ecuatorial hoy?
Dentro de Guinea Ecuatorial no existe ningún tipo de ambiente literario y por consiguiente no hay ningún tipo de ambiente cultural. Porque lo que caracteriza al régimen que nos está mal gobernando desde hace 32 años es precisamente procurar la desculturización, que la gente no aprenda, se desprecia el saber, en vez de estimularlo desde el poder se ridiculiza a los espíritus libres, a los espíritus creadores, a la gente que tiene un título universitario. Vive mejor en Guinea Ecuatorial la gente que es ignorante, los que solamente se dedican a aplaudir al presidente y a sus hermanos. De manera que no podemos hablar de ningún ambiente cultural dentro de Guinea Ecuatorial. La prueba de todo ello es que la mayor parte de los mejores escritores de Guinea Ecuatorial vivimos en el exilio, la mayoría de ellos en España.
There is no literary scene at all in Equatorial Africa. Unfortunately, the current president for 32 years has made a great effort to deculturize, to take culture away from the country. And the people who prosper are the ones who are ignorant and who adore him and his family. And all the writers of Equatorial Guinea live outside of Equatorial Guinea, and they live mostly in Spain. So that's unfortunately the truth of the situation.
Okay. I visited Malabo several years ago, and I'm a proponent of cultural centers in countries because for me they are a place for cultural expression. And I was pleased to visit the Hispanic Cultural Center in Malabo. And I know that you were a director there at one time. And so I'm wondering about the programs relating to poetry and literature that might have occurred during the time when you were there. I noted at the time that there were publications and it just seemed like a very lively place. And so I'm wondering if you could just say a bit about your work there and some of the the key programs that might have occurred when you were director?
La señora ha visitado el Centro Cultural Hispano de Malabo y dice que le gustó mucho lo que veía, que había mucho entusiasmo y mucha gente, y le quiere preguntar al señor Ndongo, y como él fue director en un momento en ese centro, ¿qué opina del trabajo del centro en Malabo?
Sí, efectivamente, yo fui director del Centro Cultural Hispano-Guineano desde 1985 hasta 1992, en que pasé a ser el representante, el delegado de la agencia de noticias EFE. En esos 7 años hicimos, creo yo, una labor muy intensa de promoción de la cultura. En el campo de la literatura, por ejemplo, creé las ediciones del Centro Cultural, que fueron el embrión para sentar las bases de una producción literaria en español, porque hasta ese momento la literatura de Guinea Ecuatorial era solamente oral, puesto que nuestras lenguas nativas no son ágrafas, no se escriben. Y luego, y en el español no había una producción literaria. Entonces, las ediciones del Centro Cultural sirvieron para eso, para animar a mis compatriotas a empezar a escribir. También creé la revista África 2000 y la revista El Patio, donde también podían escribir los guineanos que tuvieran ya no solamente los literatos, sino incluso los economistas, los músicos, quien tuviera algo que aportar a la discusión de la situación nacional. En música, por ejemplo, ahora las muy famosas Hijas del Sol empezaron cantando en el Centro Cultural Hispano-Guineano que yo dirigía. Y así podemos hablar también de las artes plásticas, de la promoción del cine, de la danza, etcétera, etcétera. El Centro Cultural Español ahora es el heredero directo de aquella labor que iniciamos hace muchos años. Están haciendo una labor que me parece importante, pero claro, los centros culturales españoles y los centros culturales de otras naciones, como el francés, no pueden sustituir la acción del gobierno. Oficialmente hay un Ministerio de Cultura, pero que no hace absolutamente nada. Y desde luego, si no existieran esos centros culturales extranjeros, no habría absolutamente nada en el panorama cultural de Guinea Ecuatorial.
Effectively, I was a director of the Cultural Center for 7 years, from the mid-80s to 1992. And those were very crucial years because it became a real cultural center, not only for literature, but for music, for dance, for painting, and for the arts. But this is a center for Hispanic literature. It is not supported by the government. Es verdad que el gobierno no es del gobierno, es de España.
No es de España.
Spain supports the Hispanic Center of Malabo. So he wants to keep pointing out that even though this is very important and it brings together the artists of many kinds, it is not supported by the government. Did I miss something? No dije todo, ¿no?
Creo que sí.
And my last question, what steps do you think need to be taken to bring attention and recognition from the international community to the body of literature and poetry of African writers, of African authors? Let's say African authors in general, not just from Equatorial Guinea. Okay, so you could. Oh. Okay. You're right. Okay. I think to condense that, then what steps do you think need to be taken to bring attention and recognition, okay, from the international community to the body of literature and poetry of African authors? Okay.
¿Qué pasos deberíamos tomar para llamar la atención del mundo a la literatura africana en general y en particular la de la Guinea Ecuatorial.
En general, en el mundo no se entiende la literatura africana. ¿Por qué? Porque nosotros no nos limitamos a hacer una literatura por literatura. No, el concepto de arte por el arte no existe en las culturas africanas. Todo arte tiene que ser, al mismo tiempo que bello, tiene que ser útil. Nosotros no concebimos, por ejemplo, unos cuadros o unas esculturas que se encierran en museos para que no solamente los vean algunas personas. Para nosotros el arte tiene que estar al servicio de la sociedad. De manera que para que la literatura africana sea más conocida, hay que tener en cuenta que los parámetros esteticistas no nos valen exclusivamente. Nuestra literatura es utilitarista, tiende a hacer cosas concretas, a lograr que cambien las mentes tanto de las de los africanos como las de las demás comunidades lingüísticas, las demás comunidades culturales del mundo. ¿Por qué? Porque denunciamos al mismo tiempo la situación de miseria, la situación de opresión, todas esas imágenes, yo diría que asquerosas, que vemos en los medios de comunicación, en la televisión sobre África. Todo esto, el escritor africano no está aislado en una urna de cristal contemplando desde a la asepsia esa miseria y esa opresión. Forma parte de nuestras vidas y por consiguiente tenemos que contarlas, esas historias, para comunicar al resto del mundo cuáles son nuestras necesidades, cuáles son nuestras inquietudes, cuáles son nuestras ilusiones y cuáles son nuestros anhelos. Cuando se entienda eso, yo creo que se valorará mucho mejor la literatura que producimos los africanos.
African literature is not really purely aesthetics like in many other places. It reflects reality. It is utilitarian. And African writers write about the misery, the horror, the difficulty of living in Africa, the poverty, the hunger, what people see around the world on television. And that's why it is different from other literatures, because it is a witness to reality in Africa. And what I forgot to say in the previous question, that he mentioned about the 5 or 6 different languages in Equatorial Guinea, and many of them are not written, which is the reason why Spanish continues being the official language of Guinea.
I'm wondering, since in sub-Saharan Africa, Spanish is only spoken in Equatorial Guinea, I'm wondering about what you think Equato-Guinean writers in exile or in the country, what you might share with the Afro-Spanish diaspora.
La pregunta es que los escritores ecuatorianos viviendo en el exilio o en la Guinea Ecuatorial, ¿qué tienen en común con los escritores que escribieron sobre temas negros, los afrocaribenses, los afrolatinos, con los de la Guinea Ecuatorial? Es decir, por ejemplo, con los cubanos, con los brasileiros. Es decir, la negritud que tienen los franceses, ¿no es verdad?
Aunque a mucha gente le parezca raro o no lo crea posible, Guinea Ecuatorial es el tercer ángulo de ese triángulo en que está dividida la lengua española hoy en día, que comprende España, Latinoamérica y ahora África, es decir, Guinea Ecuatorial. Y los escritores de Guinea Ecuatorial, independientemente de que vivamos fuera o dentro del país, aportamos o estamos aportando y queremos todavía aportar más a ese espacio cultural común nuestras inquietudes y nuestras emociones africanas. Siempre escribiremos sobre África, la temática e incluso la estilística, pues es africana, pero expresada en lengua española. García Márquez escribe en sus memorias, Vivir para contarlo, que el realismo mágico le fue aportado por un escritor afrocaribeño, Manuel Zapata Olivella, al que yo tuve el placer de conocer en algún congreso de esos que uno asiste en la vida. García Márquez lo reconoce. Luego el realismo mágico es nuestro, es africano. Lo que pasa es que estas cosas muchas veces no se saben explicar, o si se explican no se entienden o no se quieren entender. Igual que ahora mucha gente olvida que desde el cubismo, por ejemplo, nace el cubismo, y todos los ismos, hasta llegar a Andy Warhol y a otros artistas, viene del arte africano. Cuando Picasso descubre el arte africano en la Exposición Mundial de París de 1900, ahí se produce esa transformación radical del arte universal. De manera que, y eso es lo que nosotros estamos aportando, y estamos también insistiendo en que debemos formar parte de ese espacio hispánico, pero desde nuestras emociones y de nuestras concepciones afrobantúes, africanas, netamente africanas.
Very interesting. There is a triangle of pan-Hispanic literature. There's Spain, there's Latin America, and there's Africa. So Equatorial Guinea is one of the points of the triangle, with Caribbean, Latin America, and Spain. There is definitely a seamlessness to it, as there's seamlessness in art. Picasso discovered or began Cubism by looking at African art with exposition in 1900 in Paris. Garcia Marquez, the famous Colombian writer who wrote 100 Years of Solitude, said that he was inspired to write to magic realism by Zapata Olivella, a Colombian writer, Afro-Colombian writer from the Caribbean. And I actually knew Zapata Olivella. Yo lo conocí. He definitely, the Afro-Hispanic writers of Equatorial Guinea are in this continuum with Alejo Carpentier and Zapata Olivella. And Nicolas so it's Nicolas Guillen, yes. So of course it's very true that they're part of the whole thing. Y también a Guillen de los años 50. Sí. We have Nicolas Guillen, the Cuban writer, recorded for the Archive of Hispanic Literature and tape, reading wonderful Afro-Cuban poems that have all the rhythm of drum beats, and also Zapata Olivella. We had them both recorded in the Library of Congress.
At this moment, let's hear from you in our audience. Who has questions? We have a few minutes now, since we started late, for questions for Mr. Ndongo. Yes.
Are there any efforts by Equatorial Guinean writers to write in the indigenous languages, or to put that, to begin to create a body of literature that reflects those indigenous languages, either by writers in Equatorial Guinea or those who are
Pregunta si hay algún escritor guineano de la Guinea Ecuatorial que escribe en el idioma nativo, original.
Yo diría que no. Hay uno, Justo Bolequia, que hace a veces en sus poemas una traducción bilingüe del bubi, él es de la etnia bubi, y al castellano y al español, pero no escribe directamente en bubi. Los demás escribimos en español. De todas formas, esta cuestión de las lenguas para mí es siempre muy interesante y muy controvertida, porque se nos acusa a los escritores africanos que escribimos en inglés, en francés, en portugués o en español, de que estamos escribiendo en la lengua del enemigo, en la lengua del colonizador. Y yo digo que esa lengua ya es nuestra, tan nuestra. Yo soy fan de la etnia fan, y es tan nuestra como para mí el fan, o para Paco Zamora el alnobonés o para Justo Bolequia el bubi. De manera que yo no tengo ningún tipo de complejo por escribir en español. ¿Por qué? Porque algunos dijeron, los de la negritud, por ejemplo, M.S. Ser, etcétera, Damas, León Damas, que estábamos escribiendo en lenguas robadas. Yo no robo nada a nadie. Cuando yo nací ya se hablaba español en Guinea Ecuatorial y yo creo que cuando muera se seguirá hablando español en Guinea Ecuatorial. Así que esa cuestión, para mí lo importante es para qué se utiliza la lengua. Toda lengua es un instrumento de comunicación y ese instrumento de comunicación lo estamos utilizando ahora para subvertir precisamente el orden establecido, para introducir en esa lengua española nuestras inquietudes, nuestros anhelos, nuestras preocupaciones, nuestras emociones, y eso para mí es lo más importante. Y una última cuestión. Yo soy fan. Si solamente hay 3 millones de fans, divididos en varios países, porque ya sabe que el colonialismo nos dividió como quiso. Pero si yo escribiera en fan, solamente tendría unos lectores potenciales de 3 millones. Sin embargo, escribiendo en español, tengo unos 500 millones de lectores potenciales. Creo que es razón suficiente para que un escritor escriba en la lengua en que quiera y en la lengua en que crea que se comunica mejor con los demás.
His native language is, he is born a Fang, but his native language is Spanish, because Spanish has been spoken when he was born and many years before that, and it will be spoken after he dies. So it's very controversial. And he says there's one writer who writes in Bubi and Spanish, but it is not clear that anybody reads him in Bubi. So if Donato would write in Fang, which is really, the Fang people have been divided, not just in Guinea but in other places, he would probably be read by maybe 3 million people. And by writing in Spanish, he's read by, I don't know, 1 billion probably, because the Spanish language is the second largest language after English in the Western world. So it is very controversial, the matter of the 5 different languages spoken in Equatorial Guinea. And some of them are not really written. Bubi apparently is. So he considers himself Hispanic, a part of the Hispanic world, and a part of the African Hispanic world. And there is definitely an African voice in Spanish literature as there is in Portuguese literature. I think I covered it.
Question. What about theater in Equatorial Guinea? In theater, would that work with an indigenous language?
La pregunta es, el teatro, como teatro es una forma oral de comunicarse, ¿hay teatro original en la lengua Fang, por ejemplo?
Sí, en todas nuestras culturas tradicionales, tanto en la Bubi como en la Ndowe, como en la Nobonesa, como en la Bisio, como en la Fang, yo soy Fang, insisto, hay evidentemente manifestaciones culturales. Y entre ellas el teatro. Hay representaciones que se hacían, y luego se puede explicar por qué ya no se hacen. Se hacían cuando terminaba la época de la cosecha, la gente estaba más tranquila, no tenía tanto trabajo, y en noches de luna llena y en época seca. Cuando se reunían todas esas condiciones, la gente se reunía en torno al pueblo y bailaba, representaba, hay un canto fundamentalmente que se llama Mvet. Mvet significa guitarra, pero decir Mvet no es exactamente lo mismo, porque el Mvet representaba o representa todavía la conjunción de todas las artes, porque mientras el trovador toca, va recitando, va recordando, va inventando, o sea, es decir, proverbios, historia, poesía, narración, teatro, porque hay una representación de gente, en fin, las máscaras, arte, etcétera. De manera que son cuestiones que todavía perviven en la sociedad y también forman parte de nuestro bagaje cultural y por consiguiente son cuestiones que tenemos y que son formas culturales que tenemos y estamos esforzándonos por aportar a la lengua española. En todo caso, el teatro en el sentido occidental no tiene mucho arraigo en Guinea Ecuatorial y el único escritor, bueno, los dos únicos escritores que hacen teatro en el sentido moderno, no tradicional, son Pancracio Esono y Juan Tomás Ávila Laurel, aunque ahora también están haciendo con fuerza una compañía, digámoslo así, de teatro en Guinea Ecuatorial que está, en fin, que anima Francisco Boturu. Entonces, esos tres, tanto Boturu como Pancracio Sono, como Juan Tomás Ávila Laurel, son los que están haciendo teatro en el sentido occidental, aunque el resto de las manifestaciones tradicionales se sigan haciendo en fechas señaladas. Y no se hacen ya comúnmente como antes, porque una de las cuestiones que hay en Guinea Ecuatorial es que el gobierno reprime todo tipo de manifestación, aunque sea cultural. Si se reúnen más de 3 o 4 personas en un mismo pueblo, está la policía política para ver de qué hablan, por qué se han reunido y esto, el miedo ese es el que hace que estén retrocediendo esas manifestaciones culturales.
I'll begin with the end. He said the government does not encourage any public meetings or reunions, so therefore there is no real theater as such. There's a lot of impromptu theater. After the harvest is in and it's good weather, people get together and dance and sing, and the guitar player tells stories and other people begin to tell stories, histories, and so forth. There are 3 playwrights working, and one has actually a company, a theatrical company, and then 2 others. But there's no theater to speak of in the way that we understand it in Spain. So, but above all, he wants to stress that the government does not encourage, on the contrary, oppresses these expressions of popular culture. And he mentioned 3 playwrights, and one is Boturu. Boturu,
Juan Tomás Ávila.
Juan Tomás Ávila.
Y Pancracio Esono.
En Pancracio Esono. ¿Y viven afuera o adentro?
Los 2 viven dentro. Boturu y Pancracio viven en Guinea Ecuatorial y Juan Tomás Ávila acaba de exiliarse hace 1 año. También estaba en Guinea Ecuatorial, pero acaba de exiliarse hace 1 año hacia España.
One of the playwrights, Ávila, has just left Equatorial Guinea for Spain. The 2 others are still there. So above all, culture is not something that the government supports.
Could you stand, please?
Why'd you come up? To the microphone. To the microphone.
¿Escribe usted para estético o para utilizar y cambiar los mentes?
Can you repeat the question? She wants to know whether Donato writes aesthetics or whether he wants to change people's minds. So she's for the government.
Ya dije antes que como africano yo no creo en el arte por el arte. Por consiguiente, sabemos que la literatura es un arte y por consiguiente tiene que ser bella. Las cuestiones tienen que expresarse con armonía y esa armonía está en las palabras. Entonces, saber unir las palabras, saber lo que los chinos antiguos llamaban escoger la palabra precisa, es lo que tratamos de hacer para que la gente lo entienda y el mensaje entre con belleza. Bien, pero esa belleza no es suficiente por sí misma, tiene que ser algo que sea útil. Y también he dicho antes que la literatura para mí es fundamentalmente comunicación, enviar mensajes. Es decir, explicar por qué estamos así, porque África está así por razones, hay razones, no porque los africanos son así, sino que hay razones profundas que hacen que estemos como estamos. Entonces, y Guinea Ecuatorial en particular, donde desde hace 43 años, desde que obtuvimos la independencia, no hemos conocido la libertad ni el desarrollo. Y eso hay que explicarlo a la gente, pero no explicarlo a la gente desde la historia, que es otro género, o desde no, sino desde la literatura, de forma que ese mensaje sea permanente, que la gente lo grabe en su cabeza y a partir de ahí luchemos todos juntos o hagamos todos juntos, nosotros los escritores y ustedes los lectores, para que esas realidades tan duras cambien. Ese es, para mí, es la finalidad. Mucha gente dice que no, que la literatura solamente tiene que ser de evasión y contentar a la gente. Yo digo que no. Y digo que no, ¿por qué? Porque si hacemos eso, borraríamos a Cervantes, porque Cervantes revolucionó muchas cosas, aparte de la propia novela. Borraríamos a Cervantes de la historia de la literatura, a Dostoyevsky, a Dickens. Aquí mismo en Estados Unidos, escritores como James Baldwin o Ralph Ellison tuvieron el origen del movimiento de los derechos civiles que transformaron la realidad racial de Estados Unidos. Estoy acordándome ahora mismo de John Steinbeck, cuyas novelas, sobre todo Las uvas de la ira, cambió las relaciones laborales en California y en todos los Estados Unidos. Luego, la literatura no solamente es para evadirse y distraerse. La literatura tiene que servir para algo y para eso tratamos de hacerla.
As an African, he does not really believe in art for art's sake. He thinks art should transform society and should bring the truth out. And he cites Cervantes, the originator of the modern novel, who certainly reflected society. In the United States, James Baldrige, Ralph Ellison, Steinbeck have all had profound effects on social and economic issues in the United States. So Dostoevsky in Russia. So he sees his role as a truth teller and as a transformer more than as a pure aestheticist.
Looking at the time, I think we have time for two more questions. One and you.
So my question is, what is it that young people are learning about literature at universities and in schools? What are they reading? I know you said that there was no literary scene, but young people in schools and at university, what are they reading? Which authors?
¿Qué leen los chicos en la escuela? Ella sabe que usted ya dijo que no hay ningún soporte al gobierno por literatura y cultura. ¿Qué leen los chicos en la escuela, en la primaria o secundaria? ¿Qué clase de literatura?
En Guinea Ecuatorial, los estudiantes de ningún nivel, de todos los niveles, ninguno lee. No, parece una exageración. Ninguno lee, ¿por qué? En toda Guinea Ecuatorial no hay una sola librería. Ni una sola.
It may be, believe me, it's not an exaggeration, that in Equatorial Guinea nobody reads. Nobody's encouraged to read. And there's not a single bookstore in Equatorial Guinea.
Las únicas bibliotecas que existen son las que han traído o las que traen los centros culturales, el Centro Cultural Francés y el Centro Cultural Español. De manera que los que pueden, porque no todo el mundo vive en Malabo y en Bata, que es donde están esos centros, no todo el mundo vive ahí. O sea que los que no viven en tal no tienen acceso a la lectura.
And there are very, very few libraries, and the only ones are the ones that are the Hispanic centers by Spain and the French, l'Alliance Française. So, and you have to be in the capital, in Malabo or in Bata, to have access to those centers. So, literacy is not encouraged.
Desde que hace bastante tiempo vengo criticando públicamente esta situación, el gobierno de Guinea Ecuatorial construyó un edificio y puso un rótulo, Biblioteca Nacional. Usted puede entrar en la página web y verá que no hay nada. Hay una página web, pero verá que no hay nada. Solo hay una secretaria de Estado, una señora, una señorita, a la que nombraron secretaria de Estado de Bibliotecas, Archivos y Museos. Y no hay ni biblioteca, ni archivos, ni museo.
There is a building built, which is called the National Library. It is just a building with a secretary for libraries, museums, and archives, and then no libraries and no archives. So it is just a shell. It has a web page, and it has a big sign saying National Library of Equatorial Guinea. And also no hay periódicos.
Sí, no hay, al decir no hay periódicos. No hay ni un solo periódico en Guinea Ecuatorial. Los únicos medios de comunicación son la televisión y la radio que son del gobierno del país, que acapara el gobierno. No hay información ni noticias, nada que traspase el ámbito del gobierno. Solamente los grandes discursos siempre históricos del señor presidente don Teodoro Obiang. Son los que acaparan la información.
There are no newspapers at all, and the only communication is television and radio, state-owned, and you have to listen to the president and his views. So.
Y por último, decir que aparte de todo eso, yo puedo afirmar que en Guinea Ecuatorial no hay luz eléctrica. ¿Por qué? Porque un apagón puede durar 4 meses, 5 meses, se va la luz y durante 4 o 5 meses, entonces, ¿cómo la gente va a leer si a las 6 de la tarde exactamente ya anochece? Por la mañana el sol sale a las 6 y se va a las 6 de la tarde. Yo tenía que leer con una lámpara de petróleo. Y yo tenía dinero para comprar ese petróleo. La gente que vive en las zonas rurales no tiene dinero ni para alumbrarse con una lámpara de petróleo. Esa es la terrible situación de Guinea Ecuatorial. Y podríamos ir mucho más allá, pero creo que con eso es suficiente como ejemplo.
As an example, there really is no electricity in Guinea, in Equatorial Guinea. Electricity can be out for as much as 4 months. And the sun rises at 6 o'clock in the morning and it sets at 6 o'clock at night. And you can read during the daylight hours, but not after the sun goes down. And in many areas, there's no electricity at all. So he will stop with that just to paint you a kind of a sad picture of what's going on.
Turn this way. Okay. Well, hola, me llamo Sande Costley y soy una estudiante en la Universidad de Howard. Mi especialidad es periodismo y estoy tomando clases de español. My name is Sande Costley. I'm a sophomore, print journalism major from Arlington, Virginia, and I attend Howard University, and Spanish is my minor. And my question to you is, what advice can you give minority students who want to learn Spanish and study abroad?
What was your question exactly?
Like, what advice can you give to minority students who want to learn Spanish and study abroad?
In Equatorial Guinea?
No, minorities in America who want to learn Spanish and study abroad.
¿Es una buena idea para personas de la minoridad aquí estudiar español o estudiar las lenguas? Was that the question about native language? O las lenguas nativas, sí. ¿Qué consejo le da? Ella es una estudiante de Howard University, de periodismo, y quiere saber qué idioma deberían estudiar, español o Fang.
Es una cuestión difícil de responder. ¿Por qué? Hombre, durante bastante tiempo yo siempre he creído que si la lengua, como dije antes, es un instrumento de comunicación. Si usted quiere comunicarse con 500 millones de personas en Europa, en África y sobre todo en América, yo creo que tiene que aprender el español. Porque, como digo, solamente hay 3 millones de Fang divididos entre Guinea Ecuatorial, el sur de la parte continental de Guinea Ecuatorial, el sur de Camerún, el norte de Gabón y unos pequeños trozos en la República Centroafricana y en Congo-Brazzaville. Eso es todo el horizonte FAN. Ahora, si sus intereses como periodista van a desarrollarse en el África Central, aprenda FAN. Pero también tendrá que aprender otras lenguas, porque el FAN no es el idioma dominante en esa zona. Hay otros idiomas mucho más importantes en esa misma zona. Ahora, si sus intereses como futura periodista van a ir, a hacer información en América Latina o sobre América Latina, yo creo que le conviene aprender más el español. E incluso el español le va a permitir algún día ir a Guinea Ecuatorial y hablar con todos los guineanos, no solamente a los FAN como yo. Podrá hablar con otros bubis, con danoboneses, con visiós, con ondoés. ¿Por qué? Porque también hablan español, pero no hablan FAN.
To answer succinctly, there are 5 different languages. So if you study only Fang, you can only communicate with the Fangs in Equatorial Guinea. Also, Fang is spoken in some areas of Gabon and Cameroon and one other country that I can't really remember. So, but if you speak Spanish, you can speak with all the people of Equatorial Africa. So the answer is yes. If you want to concentrate on a certain segment of the population, learn that language, but also learn Spanish. Because with Spanish, you can communicate to something like 1 billion people in the world. So that's the short answer.
One last question.
We have seen in looking at African countries and many other places in the world where people are oppressed, you cannot kill the human spirit or talent. And my question to you is, what can people like you and your colleagues who are exiled do to help those young people in Equatorial Guinea who aspire to be like you, who want to be authors and writers? What medium can you use to reach them? How can you impart your wisdom to them somehow?
¿Cómo se puede ayudar a la gente joven de la Guinea Ecuatorial que recién empiezan para que lleguen a ser escritores y para que vean el mundo? ¿Qué manera hay de llegar a aconsejarles?
Yo creo que la mejor manera es procurar que tengan una educación adecuada. No sé, en Estados Unidos supongo que hay muchísimos programas con becas y otro tipo de ayudas que pueden favorecer a jóvenes estudiantes que quieran ser escritores el día de mañana. Yo creo que un escritor necesita fundamentalmente 2 cosas: tranquilidad espiritual y posibilidad. Si le ofrecemos la posibilidad de poder educarse, de poder comprar libros o de leer libros, aunque no los compre, en bibliotecas como esta, etcétera, etcétera, le estamos haciendo un gran servicio. Y necesita también abrir sus horizontes, conocer gente, conocer mundo. Todo eso favorece al escritor. Son, digamos, los complementos de la tarea del escritor. Sin medios de comunicación, sin periódicos, por ejemplo, sin tener acceso a la información, es difícil escribir. Sin tener contacto con otras personas y llegar a la humanidad de otras personas, es difícil escribir. Porque, bueno, a menos que escribamos ciencia ficción, ¿no? Pero para eso ya está Julio Verne. No necesitamos otros. De manera que si les damos la posibilidad de formarse y de poder tener acceso a medios de comunicación, a libros, etcétera, etcétera, y yo creo que les estaremos haciendo un gran servicio a esas personas.
Education is fundamental to function, to become a writer, to become anybody in the world. So once you go beyond secondary school or beyond, then of course there are fellowships, there help, aids, economic and other aids from abroad that could help the students. But given a political situation quite extensively, there isn't much help from within, so the help would come from outside of Equatorial Guinea.
I think we should conclude at this point. And so thank you very much for coming. And thank you very much, Mr. Ndongo, for visiting the Library of Congress and for consenting to speak to us today. And thank you, Cristina Ruiz from the Embassy of Spain. Thank you, Bernadette Paolo. Thank you, Robert Casper. And thank you to Mary Jane Deeb, the chief. And please remember that we do have copies of Shadows of My Black, of Shadows of Your Black Memory, a publication of Donato Ndongo, translated, and with a postscript by Michael Ugarte. And we have those for sale in the back. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.